Welcome to the Golf Parent.
What you say?
Why do so many of us play small in life? Like, I'm sure when you ask that question to a lot of your students, I mean, maybe they're saying on a superficial level or thinking that that's what you want to hear, that they say they want to be the best player in the world, but do they actually believe it? Do they say that? I mean, do you find that most people that come to you are saying they want to be the best of the best, or are playing small compared to what is actually inside of them?
Oh, I think that, I think there's overachievers and underachievers. I think if you kind of start looking at sports as people that seem to get more out of themselves. You see somebody like a Zach Johnson, you think probably or let's say even Luke Donald. Okay, Luke Donald got to number one in the world, and he's not doesn't do anything that would just makes you stop in your tracks and go, "Oh my gosh, I can't believe how far he hits it or how good he does X, Y, or Z." Right? So he had to overachieve to get to number one in the world, and there's other players that like Dustin Johnson that could get to number one in the world at probably 80% of his capacity. Right? So there's people that that along the entire spectrum. And I love overachievement, by the way. I'm fascinated by it. I think it's the most interesting thing ever. Is how do you get more out of yourself than it looks like it's possible? And I do believe intention is what drives that. So looking at trying to kind of understand that from a competitive perspective, I do think that um, there are people that say it but don't mean it. I had a tour player that I was coaching at one point in time, and you know, when he was leaving college, I said, "What do you want to do?" He says, "I want to be the best player in the world." And this kid had the capacity to do it. So we worked and got him out there on the tour, and he won a tournament and kind of got himself about 30th or 40th in the world, and then kind of tapered off and kind of started kind of going backwards. And by the end of the year, he was at 60th in the world. So we're at this kind of year-end team meeting, and he's got all his physio and got his strength coaches there, and sponsors, and we're all in the room. And they're all going around talking about how proud they were of him, so it's my turn to talk, and I said, okay. I said, Jonathan, I would agree with everything's been said so far. I mean, it's been a phenomenal year, and really, really super excited for you. I said, but I do have a question for you. I said, when you and I were first started this adventure, we you told me you want to be the number one player in the world. And I said, is that still true? He goes, yeah. And I said, okay. I said, well, I will tell you this. I will tell you that your actions probably in the first probably last year and probably the first quarter of this year looked like that to me. But since then, I would say your actions don't reflect that. And I'm going to ask you again right here in front of all these people, is that what you want? Okay. Because if it is, then I'm going to call you out because you're not, there's some things that need to happen for you to kind of get back to that. If you're not, you need to let me and everybody else in this room know so that we can adjust our expectations, right? Because if you're telling me you want to be number one in the world, us sitting around here patting you on the back about all this great stuff, and I'm not, I'm not saying that you know, there are some incredible things that have happened, but your foot is not on the gas. You're not pushing towards this number being number one in the world. And, I think it was he kind of snapped back and said something kind of silly. And I said, I just want you to think about it, okay? And you can snap back if you need to, and if you think that's an offensive comment. But to be fair, I said, if you're going to get there, you need people to be able to kind of lean in and remind you that that's what you said. I'm not asking you, and if you change your mind, that's okay too. I'm okay. You just need to let me know what it is that you want to do. And it turns out the kid's he's pretty happy if they're 75th in the world. He's super content. Doesn't really want to be much better than that. So there's one thing to say it, and then the other thing is to kind of go out there and actually try to do it and live it. Because being number one in the world is really hard, right? Being top 10 in the world is it's a lot of work, a lot of sacrifice, a lot of right. Being 100th in the world is still hard, but it's not as hard as 10th in the
That's
world.
easier than number one. I heard recently that we all need three friends in our life. We need somebody that can tell us like a truth sayer. So somebody that tells us the truth, no matter how painful, holds us to account, like it sounded like you did. We need somebody that can be our confidant, that we can share our biggest secrets with, and we know it's a vault that they'll advise us and share those secrets. And then the third is a ride or die. So somebody that you could call up at 3 a.m. and say, "Hey, I need you," and they say, "Okay, where? I'll be there." I'm curious with the player that you're talking about here, did he keep you on, or was that truth a little bit? Yeah, so he wanted the truth, but then he realized that what you were asking him, if he's being truthful with himself, he was okay with being just a player
Yeah,
instead of
he
the
circled
best.
back. He circled back with me after a while. It was a while. I mean, this all happened kind of at the end of the year, our year end meeting, and so we were talking, kind of trying to get ready. So he had some time off, and about 60 days later, he came back to me and he said, "Hey, listen," he goes, you know that meeting we had?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "You remember that question you had about being number one in the world?" I said, "Yep." He said, I was, it really kind of upset me a little bit at first when you asked me that, 'cause I'd worked hard to kind of accomplish some things, and it goes, and what I thought back about is you had indeed kind of told me that you were proud of that, but that second question kind of knocked me back. I wasn't, it was like I was expecting everybody to kind of tell me, all this feel good stuff, and he goes, "To be fair, Kevin," he goes, "I don't want to be number." I said, "Well, okay." I said, "Well, let's talk about that." He goes, "Probably 50th in the world kind of keeps me in, if I'm in the top 50, I get to go to all the majors. I get to." I said, "So, probably 40th in the world's probably realistic for me." It's okay. And so that's what we did. And he's
And
done
did he
that.
hover around that number?
Yep. Yeah. So because it's like once we kind of got an idea kind of where he wanted to be, we could, there's a certain, the, there's certain amount of work that kind of goes with that, and we were able to regulate that. And with his let's say whether it's his the benchmarks we had for him, or the amount of workloads, or kind of how hard to push him and not push him, and the things that you tell people along the pathway that that like I said are dependent 100% on where they're trying to go. One of the things I would say that is probably from a coaching perspective, is probably around this intentional thing, is the intent has to be set by the player. It can't be set by the parent, can't be set by the coach. And so, unfortunately, some of these kids they've been conditioned, to try to say the right answer. And sometimes it takes a while to actually get to their truth, whatever that is. And so some of the kids, have the capacity. They have a knowing inside themselves about what their truth is, and others of them, it's under layers and layers and layers of things that they've been, that they think that they should say, or they've been told to say.
A lot of respect for the self-awareness of the player that you're talking about, to be that honest, to be like, no, actually, this is where I'm at, and this is what I truly believe and want. I mean, like, that's a beautiful thing, that level of self-awareness, because it's tough, because you're forced to have to face a man in the mirror a little bit and be like, wait a second, what do I actually want? And it's I find that when there's a schism, or like, the distance between who you actually are and who you say you are, or who you think you are, but who your actions are, who you actually are, and the wider that gap is, the more, I guess, ego, insecurity, just the more of the ickiness of a personality or
Yeah,
life
yeah.
is found in there. The more you can be in alignment and congruence, yeah, it's powerful.